Thanks everybody for coming this evening, and it is great to see so many of you who've come to hear and join in a discussion with Nora Räthzel, who'll be talking about the necessity for degrowth. I think we're all very much aware that these are heart-rending days in the history of Palestine, Israel. And some have suggested that this evening's seminar should be deferred again, but we've decided against doing that. The events in the Middle East and around the world are embedded within heart-rending days, also in the story of life on Earth, and many see this as being the beginning of a final chapter. As we reel from climate breakdown and biodiversity loss from one environmental catastrophe into another, this evening we'll focus on the predicament of our planet and how degrowth can help to limit such environmental breakdown. I'm delighted that Nora Räthzel is with us to talk about that. She's a professor of sociology at the University of Umeå, Sweden. Her main research areas are environmental labor studies, transnational corporations, and gender and ethnic relations in everyday life. Our last seminar from Chris Saltmarsh for the Environment Network was on the Green New Deal and the Labour Party. And certainly the Labour Party believes that you can have regular growth in GDP while at the same time decarbonizing and restoring biodiversity loss. Nora will challenge such a view. We're delighted to welcome you to speak to JVL, Nora, and we're looking
Thank you very much for inviting me.
What you have to say. Welcome, and welcome to everybody.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see all of you. I mean, I was one of the people who said maybe one should find another date under these circumstances, but I'm very happy to see you all here. Although my story is not a happy one either, right? So sometimes I think maybe one should not put one sad story upon the other, but on the other hand, one has to know what is going on in order to be able to fight against it. So what I will do is I will start with an introduction about what I see is the ecological crisis, as opposed to the climate crisis that it's always called. I think that is not enough, and I will tell you why I think that. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk about why green growth is an oxymoron. And the third part will have some small positive developments by talking a little bit about trade union perspectives on environmental studies, environmental policies that are also oriented towards, I would not say degrowth, maybe that is too much, but questioning the necessity and the intelligence of growth, right? So I will share my screen. I have a lot of slides, but some go very, very quickly. And if you have questions in between or comments, you know, just talk while I'm talking, then we can have a kind of conversation in between also. That's the right one. So I'm going to make you all a bit smaller, unfortunately. So it's always funny with this Zoom because you talk to your own screen, right? You talk to your own PowerPoints, which is a bit strange, but we have all gotten used to that more or less, I guess. So what you see first is a kind of introductory picture. So it shows a picture of the same place. The first one on the one with a lot of snow, I don't know if it's on your right or left side, was taken August 13, 1941. And the other one was taken August 31, 2004. And you see, I mean, one doesn't have to explain. You see the huge difference between just a bit over 60 years. So shows very well what is happening on our planet. So the title is The Ecological Crisis, the Pipe Dream of Green Growth and Workers' Movements for People and Planet. So I start with the latest news of the Organization of Meteorology. And they have put on this very nice graph where they show where we are, and that's only on CO2 emissions. So they say between 2015 and 2021, we had the 7 warmest years on record. And as you will have read, this year was the hottest year that we ever had. And the degree of heating was so high that even the pessimistic climate science didn't believe that this was happening. They were not seeing that. Then the atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations continue to increase in spite of all the talk that we're getting there. The climate change made extreme heat and floods worse in 2022, and we can now say also in 2023. But as the scientists say, if we had an early warning system, some risk could be reduced. The cities are major contributors to global emissions and highly vulnerable. As global warming increases, tipping points in the climate system cannot be ruled out. And while that has been written 1 year ago, we already know of a tipping point now. The Institute for the Effect of Climate Change in Potsdam, Germany, has now found out that we have reached a tipping point regarding the melting of the Arctic ice. So whatever we do, even if we would stop all emissions today, it is clear that all the Arctic ice will melt in about 30 or 50 years. They are not sure how long it will take because they don't know if the ground on which the ice is, whether that's hilly or flat. Of course, if flat, it's going to melt quicker. So there is a 93% chance that at least 1 year between 2022 and 2026 will be the hottest on record. We're just living through that year. Where I live in Barcelona, we have 30 degrees now. It is completely crazy for October. We've never had that before. The ambition of new emissions reduction pledges need to be 7 times higher as they are now to meet the 1.5 degree temperature goal. And I mean, you know, everybody is talking about the Paris Agreement all the time. We have to reach that goal and realize those goals. But the fact is, even if the pledges that were made with the Paris Agreement were realized, we would still have 3.5 to 4 degrees. So the pledges themselves are not enough, and I don't have to tell you that they are not even realized. So we are not in a good place, but that's just CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. Let's go further on. Let's say something which is a little bit amusing. In the Life magazine of 1962, Humble, which is today's Exxon, said as a kind of advertisement for its fantastic work, each day Humble supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. So that was an advertisement for their capacity. And I think they couldn't make that advertisement today, which shows that things are getting better, right? Let's be a bit optimistic. So let's go to the other part of the ecological crisis with the disappearing of habitats, the way in which we reduce the forests and cut down the forests makes that many species around the world will soon disappear forever. And that is one of the reasons why we have pandemics. I will read you this quote from the biologist Kate Jones from the Institute of Zoology. Demand for wood, minerals, and resources from the global north leads to degraded landscapes and ecological disruption through extractivism that drives disease. So animals lose habitats, live crowded together, and come into greater contact with humans, spreading their viruses. So I'm bringing that because we don't tend to make all these connections in the media and in the public debate. All these crises are kind of dealt with as if they were separate from each other. Here we have the pandemic, there we have the climate crisis. No, this is all working together, right? The humans are just 0.01% of all life, but have destroyed 83% of wild mammals. And you can see here, 82% of plants, 82% in the world are plants, 13% are bacteria, 5% is everything else, and in everything else are the humans. And they're found on land, in the oceans, and in the deep surface of the earth, the bacteria. So since the rise of human civilization, as I said, or as I read before, 83% of wild mammals have been lost. 80% of marine mammals, 50% of plants, and 15% of fish. So the humans just still have a little work to do with the fish. When you look at the birds, 70% of birds are chicken and other poultry, and only 30% are still wild. And if you look at all the mammals on Earth, 96% are livestock and humans, and only 44% are still wild mammals. If we look at this worldwide, here you can see on this map, in red are the places where the biodiversity loss is greatest, and then you see it getting less a little bit according to the colors. So if the loss of biodiversity continues at the present rate, then 1,058 vertebrates will have been lost between 1900 and 2050. Without human intervention, it would have taken 11,700 years for the same amount of vertebrates to disappear. This is an important argument because there are a lot of people, half climate deniers, half people saying, well, it's not all that bad, which keep saying, okay, the climate has always changed, biodiversity has always been lost. So it is very important to look at the dimensions of human-made biodiversity loss and biodiversity loss that occurs naturally. Let's look at land use. The total land for grazing, sorry for the meat eaters, but that's just one example here, is 26% of ice-free land surface. And of that 26%, 20% of that total pasture and rangeland has already been destroyed. And when I say destroyed, it means it cannot regenerate. There is a certain degree of how do I say, using the land in a negative way so that it becomes ill and degraded, but there is a degree of degradation that cannot be regenerated, would take 1,000 years to regenerate that. Then the total land in feed crops is 33% of arable land. That is 33% of the land that we could use for food, we use in order to feed animals. Deforestation is another very big theme, as you know. Within the last 40 years, we have cut down, or there has been cut down 1 billion hectares of forest. And if it continues like that, in 78 years, there will be no more rainforest whatsoever. Let's go to water. The groundwater, that is a research project here of the UNESCO. And they talk about the problem that the groundwater is actually the water that we have for survival. I'm going to put these things here on the side that you cannot read a little bit bigger. So the problem with the water destruction is the growing pollution through heavy metals and other chemicals, industrial, the sewage. More than 80% of the world's wastewater flows back into the environment without being treated or reused. And the thing is, if you destroy the groundwater, you cannot regenerate it again. Then agriculture is also a very dangerous form, the form for agriculture that we have, of course, not agriculture as such, because the agrochemical runoff and livestock waste destroys not only the land, but also water. So where is all the water? We have 2.8% of fresh water we get through rain, 0.30% is on the surface, 28.15% is groundwater, and 75.5% of the water is frozen. So we could say, oh, good, that all these frozen water is melting. But the problem is it is melting so fast that people cannot use it. So that in the areas where people are very dependent on the glaciers, and the glaciers are melting very, very fast, there is no idea how people living in that areas are going to have water in the future. So if we put all that together, we look at the production processes, which consists on extraction, transport, producing, consuming, and discarding the goods. And all of these steps damage the earth, the air, the water, human health, the health of other species, biodiversity loss, and also create global unequal exchange and a new form of colonialism. And here are some examples for that. On the left side, from my point of view, you will see those who contribute the least greenhouse gases will be most impacted by climate change. I mean, that is something that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when we started this work, people were surprised about that. Today, everybody knows that. You see that the red ones are the ones who are polluting, and below you see the ones who are vulnerable to climate change, and it's definitely not the ones who are polluting most. But also it is a class issue. So the poorest 50% responsible for only around 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. And the richest 10% are responsible for almost half of total lifestyle consumption emissions. This is a very important thing to think about because, as you will know, we talk a lot, or the public discourse is full of this concept of the Anthropocene, which as a geological formation is a correct concept because it means this is the first time in which human beings are actually transforming the character of the planet in all the ways that I have described very shortly before. But however, it is a very bad concept, the Anthropocene, when you put it into social sciences and you start saying, oh, we're all responsible, we're all destroying the planet, everybody has to consume less and change their clothes less often, etc., etc., etc. Yes, that's all very important, but as one water scientist said in a discussion about how to save water, and a mayor was talking about the way in which he's going from house to the house owners and telling not to water the garden. So the scientist said, this is all very nice and it's very kind of you, but it's totally ineffective because 60% of the loss of water and the contamination of water is through the production process, right? So we really have to look at the production process and the mode of production. So now we get to the problem of degrowth. Yeah, so there are three arguments for green growth: the circular economy, efficiency, and renewable energy. One is the circular economy, that if we recycle everything, we get out of the problem. But the problem is that only 29% of all the goods we produce are recyclable. The other is buildings and infrastructure and food and energy, and you cannot recycle that because you consume it, and the buildings are there and they may crumble, but you don't necessarily recycle the materials. I'm going to be very quick now. So the recycling rates of smartphones, I will read that because it's quicker. Information technology is the opposite of an immaterial technology. Even the smartest device needs dumb metals. At least 40 chemical elements are used in every smartphone, which means we carry around 1/3 of the periodic table in our pockets. What seems to be an almost immaterial business of zeros and ones makes use of more chemical elements than every previous technology in history. And what you see here on the image, you see the red ones are the ones that are only recycled less than 1%. The yellow ones, 1 to 10% recycled and recyclable. And the mauve ones, 10 to 25%, and so on. So this is the smartphone. Just by looking at it, you can see how little of this is really recycled and recyclable. Efficiency, that is the argument. We can still grow, but we're going to grow more efficient, so we don't need all the energy that we have used so far for efficiency, and therefore we can have green growth. So if we look at the statistics across the decades, we can see the red one is the GDP growth, the money growth, and the black one, the gray one, is the material throughput. It's the material that we are using in order to produce the things that create the GDP. And if you look at it, you'll see that it's more or less going in the same direction. So there can be relative efficiency, so that you have relatively less energy use in order to produce something, or relatively less material using in order to produce something. But there is no absolute decoupling of economic growth and material throughput, showing the same thing. So therefore, because of these conflicts, we have to use what the World Charter for Nature called the precautionary principle. Where there are reasonable grounds for concern for the possibility of adverse effects, priority will be given to human health and the environment without having to wait until the reality and seriousness of those adverse effects becomes fully apparent. And as we've seen from the beginning, and as you probably knew already, the precautionary principle is really not being the guiding principle for politics and the economy and transnational corporations. So the third argument is renewable energy. We just transfer all the renewable energy into solar panels and wind turbines. And if all the energy used now, not increasing it, would be harnessed from renewable energy, this would exceed the reserves of cobalt, lithium, and nickel and other rare earths that we need in order to create the machines that harness the sun and the wind. And therefore, I even think that the term renewable energy is a wrong term, because the wind and the sun cannot be renewed, it's just there. But the machines that are created in order to harness that energy are partly not recyclable and therefore not renewable, and use materials in a way that are going to destroy the living conditions of the people who are living around the places where minerals are extracted. So I'm not going into these details here because I have to go quicker. So just one example, which is lithium, which is a good example because it's now going to be used in all these fantastic electric cars. So the production of lithium consumes between 5 and 10 million cubic meters per year. The people living in Salar del Hombre Muerto, which is where this lithium is taken out of the earth, consume between 6,000 and 70,000 cubic meters per year. And they are losing the water. They cannot raise animals and they don't have enough fresh water to live because of the way in which this lithium is taken out in order to feed into our batteries. And if we look at where these necessary materials and minerals come from, we can see they come, for instance, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is everything else but democratic, from China, most of them. And so there is this big dependency of the whole world on specific minerals and materials that are necessary for the green growth, so to speak. And the cost for nature. I mean, this image is often used by climate deniers and climate deniers and people who say, well, we shouldn't do too much. And it's difficult to use it from the point of view of people who are the opposite of climate deniers. But it is true that the idea that we can just grow and put the solar panels everywhere is also remaining in the destructive ideology that we can, build ourselves out of the disaster through technology, while technology is one of the main things that has brought us into this disaster. The cost for workers, around 30% of the cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo comes from artisanal mining. Mines are excavated by hand under dangerous conditions, and often child labor is used. Trade union perspective, we have the North and South contradiction. I'm not going to read the quotes now, maybe if we have time in the discussion, but when we went to Brazil, South Africa, and India talking to trade unions, they see that the carbon leakage, the border adjustment methods that are used by governments and supported by trade unions in the global North are just a new form of eco-imperialism, denying the development of technology and life to the global South in order to enable it in the global North. What are the perspectives? There are a lot of perspectives. I'm going to read just the first sentence here. The key shift we need from the TUC UK is from an economic model based on growing now and distributing later to one that sees growth and equality as two sides of the same coin. So they really don't dare to get out of the growth logic, but they want to combine it with equality. But there are also other trade unions, like the aviation workers within Unite, who say we have to have workers' assemblies, that is, the workers on the shop floor need to be the ones that develop an alternative way of producing and living. And they say, I quote, an open and democratic process involving discussions to produce recommendations. And they define themselves. We are a group of aviation workers campaigning for long-term employment. We do this by challenging industry leaders to conform with climate science and reject dangerous growth. Of course, you see, there is already a perspective that growth is not the way out. Then you have the Spanish trade unions who talk about the necessity of the de-escalation of economic activity, reducing energy, water, commodities. Investments for the reconstruction need not to be directed towards sectors that constitute a risk to the climate. Reduce those areas of production. And here we have a development in Sorgiamo in Firenze, which are workers who were working for GKN. And they developed a strategy to transform their factories into another kind of production, where they want to close down big useless productions and produce parts for not automobiles, but for machines or cars or buses or trains for public transport. And that would be the perspective, to have less paid employment plus basic income in order to live a better life with more working together and living together with equality between the genders in paid and unpaid care, time for the development of all our capabilities, and time for political actions in order to transform the societies we live in. And this is my way of ending, that somebody says, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Climate denials. Okay, thank you very much for listening all the time. I'm very sorry that I talked too much.
No, you were fine. We really appreciate what you've had to say, Nora. And now is the time when people can ask questions. If you can think of a question rather than come on and give too long a speech, that would be lovely. So a question which helps to deepen our understanding of what we've been listening to is really a really good question. But of course, I welcome your thoughts and comments too. Put up your hands. You know where the electronic hand is, I guess, by now. We're all used to this system. So if you've got something to ask, please put up your, indicate with the electronic hand. Adrian.
Thank you. Yes, terrific presentation. Thank you so much. Right at the very end, talking about the trades unions, you gave some interesting examples. Is it your perception that trades unions are gradually getting to grips with the idea of degrowth, or are the ones that you cited just a minority and doesn't look like it's going anywhere?
Maybe we take a few questions, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I write them down, and
okay,
so because
John.
That was a very good speech, but I want to issue a small comment. I'm always, for various reasons, critical of the BBC, and as you know, at this time of year, the BBC covers all the party conferences. Now, given the importance of the environmental issue, I was very disappointed and a bit angry that they didn't cover the Green Party conference. And I just feel that the media should apply more coverage of this incredible potential disaster. Thank you.
And Terry.
Thanks, and yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you, Nora. A couple of questions. One is developing a bit more on the situation in the unions. I mean, a couple of the examples you gave are examples I know about, and some of them aren't. So I guess my other question is how much those examples are talking to each other, because certainly the ones I know about are very much minorities and are fighting. So the Unite one, for example, you gave, is a caucus within a union that keeps going on about, you know, green steel and all sorts of other tech fixes that don't actually exist. So it's a different way of organising, but I'm curious to know about the international link-ups. And then the second thing was at the very end, you started talking about, you know, different models, and you began to touch on socially necessary work as distinct from, you know, what I would call work for profit and material work. And I wonder how much you would integrate that into an assault on the notion of growth, which always seems to me to be about things and not what human beings need.
So maybe you'll take those questions while we can hold some of them in our minds, Nora, and then we'll move on to the next group. Would that be okay?
Yep. Okay. I mean, two were about is these elements that I mentioned, are they a minority? Yes, they are a minority. And but I mean, in Germany, for instance, there is now in the metal workers union a tendency to say we have to ask what are the things that can grow and what are the things that cannot grow. And the metal workers union, the German one, is the biggest single union in the world. But it's an important development, right? And what we are doing in our research, and that connects to the question of social necessary work, we are convinced that if you go to the shop floor, things are on the one hand more complicated because people are afraid of losing their jobs, but on the other hand, they're also easier because people want to do useful work. They don't want to be destructive. And in the courses that we've done with about 80 unionist shop floor workers in Spain and in the UK in the last 2 months, there were a lot of workers who said, no, we cannot go on producing so much. You know, especially in Spain, the industrial workers were actually so strongly degrowth that any arguments against it that I put in order to have a discussion, they just argumented them down all the time, right? So, I mean, if we want to have a bit of hope, I think it's not so much the union structures, because the union structures, they think they have to fight for every working place, otherwise they're going to lose their members. But if you go down to the members, like the conference where I just was in the automobile industry in Germany, which is very strong, 85% of the workers in the automobile industry on the shop floor think that they cannot go on like that and that electric cars are a sham. Because they know it, because they know about technology, they know about the lithium, they know it's poisonous, you know. So I think if there is a hope at all, and it's not a huge hope, it's more the discussion on the level of shop floor workers, like the aviation workers. They say, okay, we want to have our jobs, but there has to be less flying, right? It's just a tiny hope.
Okay, shall we hear Alan? Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I'm just thinking of one of the barriers to getting the change that we require is that a lot of companies develop 5 or 10-year plans of increased profitability to attract investment and shareholder value. So my question really is, Nora, after a very fine presentation, is how do we overcome those sort of barriers to a low growth or a no growth economy?
And Mark?
Excellent. Very interesting and terrifying words coming from you there, Nora. It strikes me that the level of desperation for our species and the planet is it's 100%. It seems as though we can't go any further than appalling. And if I mean, the one way it seems to sort of take away all need for productivity and profit and just sort of produce stuff that we need as a planet would be to take the wealth from the very rich and the rich corporations and redistribute that. But of course, that is something that both those corporations, who are immensely powerful, and the governments that support them will not contemplate even for a moment doing. But do you have any perspective on that could carry us any further, Nora?
And maybe I'll take yours as well, Carol, if that's okay.
Yes, we hear a lot about what's going on deforestation and what's going on with the ice caps and so on and so forth. What I don't hear very much about is what's happening insofar as dredging things from our ocean beds. And, you know, do you know why we're really not hearing very much about the destruction of our oceans, which are, you know, vital to our existence? I'm in the United Caucus, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Good.
do you want to answer those questions?
Yeah, you know, I don't have good answers to that. In the Spanish trade unions, to the question how to overcome the barriers of the corporations and the power relations. In the trade union, in the Spanish one, Comisiones Obreras, which has a very long history of environmental policies and has a research institute about environmental effects and how to overcome them. There are, as we say, the optimistas and the colapsistas. I think you understand that even if you don't speak Spanish, right? And I belong to the collapsistas, I must say, because I read the news every day about everything, but also, of course, about the environmental issues. And I'm also desperate about the way in which politics and corporations really don't care whatever they destroy, because they're thinking, okay, after us, you know, the most important is the profit. So therefore, the only small hope, and I have said that already, I have really in people on the basis who can see what is happening, and who maybe increasingly, but maybe I'm just wishing that it's increasingly, but I read more and more about it, and I meet more and more people who just don't want to go on like that, even if it means changing their jobs. I mean, I was in Scotland 2 weeks ago, and they have a research among oil workers, and 85% of the oil workers want to go out of the oil industry now, right? For many different reasons, and want to work somewhere else, renewables and something. Then you have the big movements of indigenous populations all over the world, and against lithium. It's in the image that you got, so I haven't used it now because you already saw the image. And against other forms of excavating minerals. And the minerals are now increasingly searched for and found in north of Sweden, in Europe, in Spain, everywhere. So this conflict between extracting the minerals that we need for the green growth and the people who are suffering from that, those conflicts, we're going to have them in Europe. They're not going to be over there in South America or the Congo anymore. So maybe with this kind of conflicts becoming more visible and feelable, maybe that can also change things. So to say it in a nutshell, I'm only putting my hope in people wanting to change things and creating enough movement and strength in order to force corporations to change. But we don't have time to wait for socialism, like many of my colleagues say, oh, get rid of capitalism and so on. You know, we don't have the time. So every kind of even reformist step that goes against growth and green growth is to be valued and strengthened. And the acidification of the oceans and destruction of the oceans is a very important question. I didn't have that, but I normally have it also. I think all these things are not discussed enough in public. The biodiversity, the water, the land destruction, the ocean destruction. You know, now you have these ideas that you can go 2,000 meters down to the ocean and get this mangan thing, because there are all these minerals that we need for the electric cars there. And there was this big meeting of corporations and countries, and very few countries are going to forbid that. And the oceanologists, the scientists, they're desperate and saying, don't do it before we know what that means if you're suddenly going to harvest the ground of the oceans, you know. So that's the other very, very big danger. And I think, just one more sentence, I think that is deliberate. There is a thing like compartmentalization of issues, so that you can actually manipulate people or central people on things that are technological doable, like, okay, we're going to get all this renewable energy and then we have less emissions and then we're fine. So all the other issues are not talked about, right?
There you are, Sean. Would you like to ask something?
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much for a magnificent presentation. Yeah, my feeling about all of this is that I live in Wales, where we've recently brought in these 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in urban areas. And there's a massive, actually, campaign. It's probably the biggest campaign ever in Wales against this. But we haven't sold the idea at all. Like, we've just done it, sort of kind of imposed it. We haven't gone around and said the benefits of it. The other one was here in UK recently. We had a by-election in what was Boris Johnson's seat in Uxbridge. The whole election was fought on the basis of ULAs, ultra-low emission. And what did the Labour Party do when they saw there was a campaign going on? They joined them. They joined them instead of fighting. If they had have actually fought the election in favour of ULAs, they would have won. So basically, like we're not selling these things very well at all. So you, as a sociologist, how do we get all of these messages out of people and tell people, like, you know, really it's a win-win situation for everybody? Like, you know, if we kind of remove that sort of individual greed, like of some people, like, and the support they get from the corporations. I think a lot of this shit's coming from the alt-right in America anyway, funding various grassroots projects here. So how do we do this? Get it out to people and let them know they will all benefit. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sean. And Robert, would you add your question or comment?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Nora. It's very interesting and challenging to hear what you said. My question's, I suppose, related in part to what Sean just said, which is, I mean, for example, today, Keir Starmer said he was going to pay for whatever he was going to do to try and address various social ills by growth. And so the Conservative Party are also committed to growth. And we're heading towards a general election in this country in next year or so. So it's I suppose it's a question about the implications of what you've been saying for democracy, and how, I wonder if you have any suggestions around the world as to how to insert this debate that you know we're having now into the kind of wider public debate around elections, where you know it seems so short-sighted. You know, where there's a nominal commitment to reducing, I think, hitting the climate targets, but actually the reality is both major parties, I know someone's mentioned the Greens, but both major parties are promising not degrowth but growth.
Maybe Terry, you want to come back and say
yeah,
something?
just to again to pick up on what Sean said. I mean, I strongly agreed with what he said at the end. I think this is coming from the alt-right. I think it's clear that attacks on environmentalists are going to be at the centre of both the Reform Party and the Tories' election campaign, as well as attacks on other groups, on migrants, on trans people. I think that's the stall they're setting out in the context that they're going to lose. And Starmer's response is to hide and kind of be weak and wimpy. And I mean, I agree with Nora that what's going on in the trade unions is important, but I think it's not enough. And I think we need to find a way as environmentalists to say what Sean said, which is, you know, a planet on which we can continue to live is a win situation for nearly all. I mean, it's not a win situation for those people who are wreaking destruction on the Amazon or by ripping out lithium and making profit out of it. But it is a win for the majority of people. And I think as a movement, we're not saying that loudly enough, is what I would say.
Thanks very much, Terry. Nora, do you want to continue?
Yeah, maybe so to this question, how do we do this? I mean, I think people are not just greedy. I think people are very contradictory. And in our research, what we find, I mean, again, talking to workers, not necessarily also trade unionists in office, but they're also who are also working at the same time. What you hear is, for instance, a very nice quote from a copper worker in a copper factory with whom we did a course in Spain, who said he doesn't do extra hours anymore because I work for a living, what sense does that make if I cannot live? You know, because has no time and is working all the time. And then another worker in the Volvo company, in the Volvo factory in Umeå, who said, I know that what I'm doing, they're producing the cabins for lorries. I know that what I'm doing is destructive, but I cannot go home every night and have a bad conscience that I've done something bad all day. And then people want to go out in nature. You know, we have done a research about what is the relationship between labor and nature. And usually people think nature is something out there, the pristine or pristine nature, how you say in English, that you want to preserve. And at the same time, they are every day destroying what they love. So what I want to say with these examples is that people are contradictory, and a way in which we can take people with us, like the sentence goes, is to connect with the desires that people have to live a better life that is not reduced to having more cars and more clothes, but to have time to live and to be social and to be with friends and to be with family, to do something useful that they can be proud of, and to preserve what they love. And I think it's very important that people understand, workers, that everything they work with and everything they wear and everything they eat comes from the nature that they love and want to preserve. And in the context of connecting with those desires of people, it's very, very important to look at social equality, because the problem is really that much of the policies, of the green policies of politicians, be they left or right, well, the right doesn't do anything anyway, is really reproducing inequality, social inequality. It's making it harder for poor people to live. And they have to be against it because they are concentrating on their survival today, right? So I think connecting with people's desires and connecting with the need to be socially equal and to show more clearly that the ecological destruction also has a class perspective. If that would be the policy of a trade union or a party or a Green Party or a movement or the anti-oil movement, whatever, I think that would have the possibility to get more people on board, because it's actually in their own interest to preserve the planet. And how can we relate this needs to the other need, which is you have to make a living somehow, right? And you cannot deny that. So there have to be other ways. And I'm always referring to the Lucas Plan. I don't know how many of you remember them, who created a whole plan of what you could do with your factory, with your knowledge, and with your machines in order to do socially useful things and things that are not destructive to the environment. And the same thing is happening in Firenze with these factory workers in the GKN, that together with scientists, they are developing an alternative plan for their factory. So I mean, that kind of connections between workers and scientists and sociologists maybe and psychologists, I think that might be a way getting out of the collapse. I'm not sure, but it's a possibility.
Okay, while people are thinking up whether they are going to ask another question or make a comment, I wondered if you'd say a little bit about the forces that are behind the idea of green growth, which I think we were talking about it earlier, and I think you could call at least a large section of it greenwash growth, because the forces behind it are the oil companies, and other interests of that sort, people who have an interest in the in oil and gas, and so they emphasize the possibility that that we can store carbon. I mean, we've had this amazing situation in the North Sea where licenses have been given to the oil companies to extract oil from the from the sea, and then other licenses have been given to the oil companies is to put carbon dioxide in the caverns that they will have created under the North Sea. I mean, this is complete madness. And they've also are suggesting that we could get out of the energy shortage through the hydrogen economy. And now it's just a basic fact that 1 unit of hydrogen energy requires more energy input than you get in order to create it. It's also true that most hydrogen is produced from methane. So you can see how the oil companies want this. They want to, hide the fact that they're going to produce most hydrogen from methane by having a little bit of it produced by surplus renewable energy through electrolysis, and then maybe link that to the issue of net zero, which is another sort of production of the greenwash lobby. So I wonder what you have to say about that sense that there are big forces behind this, and maybe we need to just call it out for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't talk about that because I thought that was kind of self-evident that that big corporation, and especially the oil and gas corporations, the fossil fuel corporations, they want to go on as they have gone on, and they want to find technological fixes, So how can we do business as usual with new technologies, and so that we can promise people, I mean, and that is their strength. I think the strength that they have to convince people and also workers is, don't worry, nothing is going to change. You're all going to have this fantastic life and your fantastic jobs. We're just going to have new technologies. Or like the Swedish metal workers union, very much in unison with the metal industry, the steel industry, for instance, says, we're going to develop new technologies, and then Sweden will again be best in the world with those new technologies that are green technologies, and we're going to sell them to the rest of the world, and we're going to be even better up now in the future than we are now. I mean, that is just so convincing in a certain way, and it's very difficult to fight against it, right? And but on the other hand, what I already said, I mean, because the workers are smart, like for instance, the auto workers, I learned from the auto workers industry in Germany that electric cars are so stupid because the lithium that they use cannot be recycled in any way, is totally dangerous and is poisonous, and they don't know what to do with it when the battery cannot be reused anymore. So they know all this. So this is where we can, go in and organize with the knowledge and the sarcasm of the workers. The workers are the more sarcastic people towards their company bosses because they understand what greenwashing is, because they are technologically smart, right? But what is very, very difficult to contest among trade unions, we found out, is the net zero concept, because everybody thinks net zero is zero, right? But net zero is not zero. It's just the idea that you can take out as much CO2 as you put into the earth, and then they create things like, we buy a piece of the Amazonas where the forests are not going to be cut down, and therefore they will harvest the CO2 at that amount, and we can put that amount of CO2 into the earth. And I don't know if you read the Guardian article some weeks ago, where they analyzed 50 of certified of these structures, carbon capture structures, carbon credit, and I mean, basically all of them were a sham, more or less. Some more, some less clear. I think 5% they didn't know exactly if they were really only a sham, you know, and that is so difficult to discuss with people, because everybody who is in their good faith wanting to transform us and to become more sustainable, for them it's already so difficult to get to net zero. And then we come and say, you know, net zero is in itself a pipe dream, right? That was very shocking in our courses, but at the other hand, people wanted to know it. They don't want to be treated as stupid. So, it reminds me again of the workers in the Umeå plant, you know, when Volvo at the time said, we are going to get this factory to be net zero. And the workers were laughing and were saying, aha, are they also counting in those lorries that come and bring us all the materials and the CO2 that they pump into the air? Are they counting that into the factory? Of course not.
Charlotte, you've got something to ask.
Thank you very much, Nora. Yeah, I want to ask you if you think that there is anything that is being made that comes under the greenwashing or regrowth agenda or umbrella that could be environmentally okay, beneficial, or if you think it's a complete contradiction in terms, that it cannot happen. Do you see what I mean?
I think green growth is a contradiction in terms, but I think that we also need we need new technology. I'm not against technologies. And that was something that is also problematic when you talk with workers about the future. In their future images, because we have a method like that in our courses, in the future images, people do not have any factories. They live in the countryside in a little house with a few chickens, and everything is fine. And then I say, what about antibiotics? I mean, we need industry. And therefore, it is so important to talk about converting industry and changing industry, and not just having this idea that we can live in a nice, lovely, green world where everything is like 100 years before. And actually, that is something that not just some environmentalists think, but workers also think. They themselves and their work does not exist in their utopias. And I think that is something that is very necessary to talk about. You know, if we don't have utopias, real utopias that we can fight towards, then it's very easy to say, okay, I wish it was like that, but it's never going to happen. So I might as well sit there and just do business as usual. So I think, yes, it is necessary to talk about transforming industry, transforming technologies, also developing further this hydrogen thing. I heard a lot of criticisms, but in our research project is also an engineer, and he has a different view. He thinks there is a possibility there, and it's important to discuss that, right? But not growth. Everything has to be on a lower level in the rich countries, of course, right?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, it looks like we're running out of steam, which is okay. It's been a really, it's been a really good evening, and I can tell people have really appreciated what you had to say. And I think that making these links between what's happening in the environment and what needs to happen in industry and amongst workers. And you've given actually a much more hopeful picture of what people on the shop floor have to say about their future and the future of their work and their interest in caring for the environment than I think often we might get from looking just at what some union leaders have to say about the preservation of industries.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've got anything, final words you'd like to say, but I really would like to give a lot of thanks to you for joining us from near Barcelona.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been an
Thank you.
extremely interesting time. So thank you very,
Thank
very
you
much.
very, very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for all your questions. And I'm really, really happy and honored that all of you were here all the time and we could have some kind of discussion next time we meet in person.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks very much. See
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you all. Thank you.
You,
Bye.
Jane. Thank you, Nora.